I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 of the 2010s. And in this episode, I'm going to be breaking down why I think Inside Out is the best family movie of the decade, as it concludes as my number one pick of the top 10 family movies of the decade. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about some of my favorite movies of the decade. I give my lists in a bunch of different genres, a bunch of different categories, my top 10 lists, and throughout 3 weeks, I give my picks. First week, I give my honorable mentions and my picks on the list from 10 to 7. Next week, 6 to 2 picks. And finally, a full video on my favorite romance movie of the decade, or in this case, my favorite family movie of the decade. Now, as we're sort of running out of genres, I don't want to keep on stretching it and do subgenres. I'd like to sort of branch out and do something a little bit different, which is why next week's episode is going to be the top 10 scores of the decade, which I refer to not necessarily the soundtracks, like say in a Quentin Tarantino movie, but a score as a sort of orchestral, usually, that was original music, instrumental, made for the movie. So I think I'm going to have a lot of fun with that. Then we're going to be a little bit more abstract, but also still have a couple more traditional ones down the road. Top 10 biopics is something I'm planning, for example. But without further ado, let's talk about Inside Out. The second Pixar appearance on this list, with the first being, of course, Incredibles 2, sort of representing the sequels that they made this decade, because Pixar is a great animation studio, but they've sort of, especially this decade, made a lot of sequels, and then actually few original movies compared to sort of their original days. However, when we do get a Coco or an Inside Out, they're really special, and this is the type of movie I always like them to make, because when you get a movie like Inside Out, it is so imaginative, it's so inventive. It's really the epitome of a family movie, in my opinion, because it is simple and clear for the kids, but it's also profound for the adults, and it works on both levels. About a young girl named Riley who lives in Minnesota, who's playing hockey, and whose emotions are controlled by 5 different physically manifested versions of the emotions inside her head and sort of control and drive her every day. But when she has to move because of her father's work to San Francisco, the emotions have to sort of adjust to the new scenario, which causes particularly joy and sadness to get lost in the deep recesses of her mind, into her islands. If you see the movie, you know what I'm talking about. It's kind of a weird, tough sell, but just watch the trailer. I think it does a pretty good job. And for one part of the movie, it is a lot of exposition. It is a lot of explanation, but the concept in itself, I think, is very interesting. That there's these 5 different versions of emotions: joy, fear, sadness, anger, and disgust, that are all sort of their own person or their own sort of being that lives inside Riley's head and sort of has the control panel, looks sort of very managerial, and decides how she reacts to things. And, you know, just that moving to a new school, she's having a lot of troubles. So of course the emotions have a lot of trouble with that as well. Now, Pixar is known for its great storytelling and having these great story beats with a solid structure, with great character moments that is always engaging throughout. And I think Inside Out is a classic example of this. Now, that's not to say there's not plot holes that could be used that would sort of disrupt the logic of the movie. There are, but they're often used for sort of comedic effect, so I sort of allow it. But the movie never sort of feels like that, at least in terms of on first watch. And I think the movie and what Pixar's able to do is not necessarily, they say, when people say world building, Pixar's great at world building, create new worlds, but all that really means is that you're able to create a new perspective, whether it be in a movie like Tangerine, it's a trans person's perspective, or in a movie like The Lord of the Rings, it's a Hobbit's perspective, going throughout Middle-earth. In terms of world building, they're not necessarily interested in, at least what I consider it as lore and all these small details and the whole backstory. It's really just from a unique perspective, a world that we're not able to do. And I think a large portion of why I like cinema is because we're able to go and see different perspectives and live in different people's shoes for a short period of time and gain their perspective. So what's so unique about this is that we haven't really seen this perspective, this sort of the brain, the inside the mind, and you can be so creative and so imaginative with that, and Inside Out exactly does that. The storytelling is so interesting because it has to sort of, we have to get back to Riley's mind once joy and sadness exit the control room, while fear, disgust, and anger sort of trying to deal with her at a new school and just moving and sort of dealing with a new hockey team. there's sort of that back and forth, but also just that main journey between joy and sadness explores a lot of the recesses of the mind. So we get to the subconscious area of the mind. We get to abstract thought. We get to imagination land, and we sort of can go from island to island and to park and explore these different things, and even small things like how do jingles get in your head. Just some of the workers keep on putting it back up there. Funny jokes like that, and they really mine that to every sense of the word and every chance that they get. And the movie never stops revealing things, that even though the very first sort of part of the movie is very expository, explaining how the mind works with these orbs, which are memories, and then there's core memories, which spot out islands behind her, which sort of have these sort of core pillars of her life, and then each sort of orb has its own different emotion associated to it, but then it can also be changed if one of the other emotions touches it, for example. And there's a lot of exposition in the beginning, but that's not to say that and then when it does sort of pay off and we sort of understand the world, it's very rewarding, but that's not to say that there's no revealing stuff later on, that there is quite a bit of either emotional revealing or also just funny bets that they do. Like I said, there's the dream productions or abstract thought. In the dream production scenes, there's so many little small details in the background that you can pick up with, and they make a lot of sort of funny things. And of course we meet Bing Bong, the imaginary friend, so that's an element, of course, sort of one part that Riley has forgotten. It also works because through this world building and exposition, we understand everyone's roles and we understand everyone's sort of place in this world. That joy is sort of the main emotion, the sort of leader that often tries to take place, but then sadness is always trying to be pushed to the side, that joy always wants to be Riley to be happy, and then sometimes we'll let fear come in or disgust come in, for example. But sadness is maybe one of the main enemies, so that when she joins up with sadness, there's a lot of humor between the two differences. That sadness is sort of course, always sort of depressed and dry, and often use great dry humor, of course, to add to the situation. But also, throughout the world building, we understand the dynamics between everyone, but we also understand the characters. And that can't really be done had it not been for the terrific voice acting. I think this is maybe one of the best voice acted Pixar movies, aside from maybe the first Incredibles, or I think also Incredibles 2 is pretty terrific. But we have Amy Poehler as Joy, who could have been an incredibly annoying character. We have Phil Smith as Sadness, who, like I said, is great at that sort of situational-based, dry humor, reacting to situations in only the sadness kind of a way, while also sort of hitting home some of the emotional scenes with Bing Bong later on in the movie. But what's interesting about Joy is that you think she could be a really annoying character, but the truth is that she's not an annoying character because she actually is not just one emotion. That even in a movie where your physical representation of sadness, and that's all you are, or your physical representation of joy, you can be really chipper and really annoying, but even though she's she's supposed to be joyous all the time, she's not. The trick is, the secret is that she has all five of the emotions within her. She feels fear, she feels anger, she feels disgust, and Joy really is sort of a three-dimensional character in that respect, and sort of has to learn throughout her movies because she is a bit ignorant, and I think Amy Poehler really brings a lot of that to her, and she's not annoying, even though she is chipper most of the time, it doesn't sort of rub on your skin because the character, I think, is three-dimensional enough and actually is not just joy. It has sadness, has anger, has disgust, has all the emotions within her, that way that maybe some of the other emotions actually don't. But joy is sort of unique and special in that moment. And then also, of course, Amy Poehler really makes her come alive and feel joyous, but never sort of leaning into that annoying territory. And there's an incredible balance that they sort of ride on in that sense. But this movie, of course, is more than just a terrific, adventure film inside the mind of a 12-year-old girl. That it balances the line really well, which is why I think it's a terrific family movie, which I said at the top of the show, is because I think it's simple, it's clear in terms of its message, and concise in terms of its world for kids. It's also incredibly colorful and silly, and there's some imaginative friends and small things that they can pick up on. And then, of course, for the adults, I think there's actually some, this is based in rooted in actual psychology. So there is sort of, I think, moments that can be profound, that can be sort of able to reflect on your own life. That actually, there's only one film, but depending on where you are in your life, you're interpreting it different ways. You're seeing it from different moments. That when you're a little kid, you're seeing it from, Bing Bong and the imaginary friend and having these great emotions, and actually But then as an adult, you're sort of seeing it more as a nostalgic in a way, sort of remembering, thinking about your own sort of memories and how you sort of reacted to things and how you sort of got your emotions maybe out of hand. But I really enjoy the sort of lesson that it's sort of being putting out there, and sort of it's a good message for kids, but I also think a helpful reminder for adults that emotions exist, that you shouldn't necessarily suppress them. You should allow yourself to feel sad or to feel joy, but ultimately to control them at the end of the day. But just allow you to feel, because sometimes you try to suppress them and don't want to feel sad all the time, so you just try to feel happy all the time. But it is sometimes good to feel sad, and that's sort of some of the moments and the message of the film. And I think for both children and adults, it works in the sense that it gives you a clear visual framework, especially for children. If they're feeling anger, they can almost literalize and visualize within their head that anger is sort of pushing on their control stick, and that's why they're feeling it. And it's an easy way to sort of communicate their emotions, which is something that, is of course difficult for children. But it almost is an adult film. I think it's maybe Pixar's most adult film because, it does deal with subconscious thought and abstract thought and some of these more complex themes I don't think younger children will completely understand. But and especially I think just from the perspective of an adult, we feel more of the loss of a connection with the lost memories that sort of just go into this vast pit. There's so many lost memories already within a 12-year-old girl that you probably, theoretically, in this scenario, you would have so much more that. And even the idea of looking back on memories and core memories, when sadness turns a core memory that was happy and now sad. Riley now sees it from a new perspective, that she sort of looks back on it. And I think I'm really interested in this idea of your memories, of course, change, and your memories are not the exact representation of what happening. They're happening from your perspective, but then also when you are in your life and when you're thinking about them, it could be either bad or good or fearful. You almost have a really different interpretation of your own memory. And I think the film sort of explores that idea along with many others, but I think it's a sort of interesting thought, this idea of loss, of memory, of forgetting. Especially as you get older, it's something that you try to hold a little closer and dear, and everyone wants to sort of be a kid again, and this film, in a way, kind of explores that. I mentioned Bing Bong, he's terrific. Really this whole supporting cast, and the voice cast of everyone, and then, of course, Riley's mom and dad, and Riley herself. It's really just hitter after hitter, and they're all so funny and all have their little bit and purpose for the film. I think this is maybe one of the best designed movies and one of the best looking movies of Pixar's career. It's just that sort of glow around joy. Really the design, of course you have the sort of 5 different characters that have different colors, which is very clear and easy to see within the sort of bright, colorful world. We have all different types of colorful world. We'll go to abstract thought, and the visual style will completely change. We'll go to the subconscious mind, and it's a lot bigger. I think there's a great amount of scale used with this in terms of it's shots and this production design that it will oftentimes allow joy or sadness to be small within the frame, whether it be Bozo the clown or just her on the edge. There's a great shot of joy on the edge of of the cliff, where the sort of blackness and where all the dark or the lost orbs go into this black pit, and this pit. There's a great shot of her sort of just standing over there, and really allowing her to be small within the frame. And then, like I said, the character design. Joy has this sort of glow around her. Fear has this almost string nerve kind of thing. Anger, of course, is great block. Even Bing Bong is a mix of an elephant and cotton candy and everything. He's just very uniquely designed, and I think that's why I really enjoy the movie. Is that so much of the movie, incredibly with the design, is imaginative. It's creative. It's smart, and it mines that for jokes and for comedy, but also for some profound sort of mental or psychological sort of thoughts that you can really profoundly sort of meditate on. We'll say, and even though it's a kids movie, I think there is. I don't even think it's a kids movie, actually. I think it's a family movie. I think that sometimes it's maybe even more for adults than it is for kids. But ultimately, I think Pixar, and particularly when they're at their best, for example, like in Inside Out here, they're able to walk that fine line, that they're able to create a piece of art that can be viewed from different perspectives and enjoyed equally and given with the same amount of respect. That it's not a kids movie with a couple of jokes for the adults. It's not an adults movie that tries to pander to kids. It really is something that can be seen from all different types of perspective and enjoyed and respected each way. And I think Pixar is great at not only creating stories, but the stories with an incredible emotional core. I think Inside Out for me has one of the strongest emotional cores. So to have a movie that is a great story, with is so inventive and so creative, which has sort of a profound message and a thought, and I can think a lot about it. Rewatches help a lot because of so much detail and inventiveness and creativity and imagination within the different types of worlds, because the movie moves so fast and goes to different types of sceneries and different types of locations. There's always new things to pick up. And Pixar is the best at this, at creating family films that are for everyone. They really are for everyone. And this one, I think, is probably the best in terms of its combination of both for kids and for adults. And that's why I think it's the #1 family movie of the decade. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to comment below. Let me know some of your thoughts, some of your favorite movies of the decade, including some of your favorite family movies. What's your Pixar rankings? I'd love to hear that. And subscribe to the channel. These videos come out every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So always check the tunes, or you can always hit the notification bell to always get a reminder when the video is uploaded. But next week is going to be top 10 scores of the decade. That should be very exciting. Until next time, stay tuned.